Okay, let's do this. Hello, people. Another beautiful day. Yeah, hope your five senses work, health and strength is good or excellent. What? What's up? What's up, gamers? Now, listen to this article. This news is ancient news. I already talked about this months ago, and I'm gonna go over it one more time. It says here, Microsoft believe Xbox lost the console wars. This news is ancient news, but I'm gonna explain it to you again. It says here, the Xbox console war existed for decades in the gaming industry. Fans of gaming companies have been keen to compare their preferred platform with competition between giants like Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft. While Sony and Nintendo performed well during the last generation, Microsoft stumbled with the launch of Xbox One. This gave competition a head start, and Microsoft has never been able to recover from this loss. A recent document, Microsoft revealed the gaming giant believes Xbox has lost the console wars. Why it matters. Competition is an important part of the gaming industry, as it helps to ensure all companies are trying their best to innovate. It is also very beneficial for the consumer. Xbox and Activision both face insane competition. Xbox has lost the console war, and its rivals are positioned to continue to dominate, including by leveraging exclusive content. Xbox has consistently ranked third in the console behind PlayStation and Nintendo. It says, in 2001, Microsoft entered the gaming industry and launched of its first Xbox video game console in the competition with the established incumbent Sony and Nintendo. In that generation, Sony and Nintendo outsold Xbox by a significant margin, which very succeeding generation over 20 years since. Sony, Nintendo, and Xbox have remained the three major console producers, have been engaged in what the industry referred to as console wars. Then it says here, the information comes from Microsoft filing heads of the FTC case for the unfamiliar. The FTC recently filed an injunction to block the Activision Blizzard merger, but Microsoft is trying its best to win the case. According to the document, Xbox has always been in third. The gaming giant entered the market over 2 decades ago, but Microsoft claims PlayStation has been the leader for 5 generations. While this is true, Xbox came very close to beating PlayStation with the Xbox 360. The console had a very strong start and was often considered the platform choice during the generation. However, Microsoft was unable to maintain the success, and document reveals that Xbox had just a 21% share of the gaming industry. And then it says here, it should be noted that this is not the first time Microsoft admitted to losing the console wars. Exactly, that's why I said it's ancient news. It says here, recently Phil Spencer claimed Xbox One generation was the worst generation to lose, as many players built their libraries during the generation. Nonetheless, Microsoft hoped this information strengthens its case against the FTC. The gaming giant aimed to acquire Activision Blizzard to improve its first-party output and provide more quality games to Xbox users. Alright, that's the end of the article from Tech for Gamers. Now, this news is ancient news. Let me break this whole thing down for you so you can get a better understanding of this. Sega was in the console business, right? Nintendo was in the console business. And then PlayStation. How PlayStation got in the console business is when they were supposed to make a CD system for the Super Nintendo, but to me it looked like Sony sabotaged the CD and gave it to Nintendo. Nintendo didn't like it, and then Sony used that. Took the PlayStation back to the drawing board and brought PlayStation to the market, right? And PlayStation was in the market. But anyway, PlayStation was in the video game industry, and they were trying to find their footing. And they did not find their footing until Nintendo had a falling out with Squaresoft, formerly known as Square Enix. And Final Fantasy was the issue here. And it was a cartridge versus CD. And once Nintendo and Squaresoft had a falling out, PlayStation reaped the benefit. PlayStation became the home of Final Fantasy, or Final Fantasy became the home of PlayStation. So once that started, the floodgates were open. When I mean the floodgates were open, it mean like for every one game that like for every one game Nintendo was getting, I would say PlayStation was getting like 6 or 7. That's how bad it was. And CD dominated cartridge. Sega had the Sega Saturn, but the Sega Saturn was a little bit more expensive than the PlayStation One, and plus it was like kind of hard to develop for it too at the same time. But PlayStation, on the other hand, build a nice user base. I mean, Sony, on the other hand, build a nice user base with PlayStation 1 because of Final Fantasy. Because once they got Squaresoft, I mean, there were games coming out the woodworks. When I say games, I mean games. The PlayStation user base was like this, growing big. Microsoft, on the other hand, now, Microsoft was already making games in PC. Everybody knows Microsoft for Windows. And with all those Windows operating systems that Microsoft built before they came into the console business, they already had an infrastructure in place already. They were already making games. Matter of fact, they published games. If you remember Flight Simulator, was it 1998 or something like that? And they had a couple others. So Sega exited the console business. Sega gave Microsoft the keys to the kingdom. But Microsoft came prepared already. Microsoft had a network. Microsoft had an infrastructure. And once Sega gave Microsoft the keys to the kingdom, if you look at the site, if you look on the Dreamcast box, you will see powered by Windows CE. That is the handshake. Okay? And Sega gave Microsoft the key. Microsoft took the keys and drive the car. So Microsoft now, they come into the console business. They know Sony built a huge user base. They knew that from PlayStation 1. Okay. And they carried over into PlayStation 2. They already knew that Nintendo had a fan base from the 8-bit Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube, all that, right? They knew about Sega. Sega gave them the keys to the kingdom. Sega exited the console business. So Microsoft is like, okay, we know we got an uphill battle. And we know that Sony and Nintendo has a big user base. So all we can do now, we got to stay competitive. And when they came out, they had Halo. They came through the door with Halo, and they came in swinging. So they came in with Halo, and then they had success with it. But then they made Halo 2. Halo 2 was too big for the original Xbox. Then they came out with Xbox Live. Matter of fact, speaking of online play, there was this thing called the X-Band modem that was on the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And Nintendo was against that, but I'll talk about that in another video or so. But Microsoft came out with Xbox Live, and they did not look back. And they had success with the original Xbox, and they were trying to build their user base from the original Xbox, which they did. But then, within every console generation, the formats, they change. When PlayStation came through the door, they were using CDs, right? Then when it came to the PlayStation 2, they were using DVDs. DVDs was 4 gig in storage. When the original Xbox came out, it didn't have a DVD player, so Microsoft had to make like this little adapter that you stick in the controller port. So now you can play DVDs on the Xbox. So between the Xbox and the PlayStation 2, we were using DVDs, right? But then when it came to the 360 and PS3 now, the storage, they were different. The 360 was using HD DVD. HD DVD is 15 gigs in storage. PlayStation, on the other hand, was using Blu-ray. Blu-ray now is the standard for DVDs. Blu-ray is 54 gigs in storage, and the PlayStation was doing it in layers. Even though Microsoft had success with the 360, even though they had a little slip up with the Red Ring of Death, they kept moving. They never they knew that they had a uphill battle against Sony when it comes to the console wars, so they have to keep moving. And Sony came out with the Blu-ray for the PS3, and when it comes to game and storage and the amount of content that you could add, like for the 360 to have the equivalence of a Blu-ray disc, they would need like say like about three to four discs on a 360. Where on a PlayStation 3 you only need like one disc. You know, so you know, Microsoft and Sony, they were battling. Even though Sony had the standard, which is Blu-ray, and that means HD DVD is now officially gone, DVDs are gone, Microsoft still kept pushing. They just kept fighting. Even when they had a little hiccups during the 360 days, they kept moving, right? Then when it came to the Xbox One, they messed up big again. But that didn't stop them. They kept moving, okay? And then PlayStation reaped the benefits of the mistakes that Microsoft made with the Xbox One, because it came down to game sharing, and you know, Microsoft had like they had tied all their games to the network. You get the story. But Microsoft, even though they slipped up, they hired Phil Spencer, and they made a nice turnaround. They made a tremendous turnaround, and they kept moving. PlayStation kept moving. PlayStation user base was still growing, but Microsoft never walked around with their heads down like this. They kept moving. So now during the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era now, Microsoft came up with Game Pass. And once they got ZeniMax Bethesda on board, Microsoft got the momentum that they need now. Because whenever you think of video games now, the first thing that comes to your mind is who? Game Pass. It used to be when you think of video games, the first thing will come to your mind is PlayStation. But now when you think of video games, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Game Pass. And Microsoft find the momentum that they need. Even though the Game Pass brought life into the Xbox community and ecosystem, Sony still has a big user base. But every time you turn around, it's like Game Pass is in the news. That title now is above every other name in video games. So Microsoft find the momentum they need. They know they can't. They know that they lost those console wars because of the user base that Sony built with PlayStation 1, and 2, when Sony had went from DVDs to Blu-ray, and 3, when Microsoft made a mistake with the Xbox One. They knew that. Now we know that Sony got a big user base, but now it's like, okay, we got to keep moving, you know. And Game Pass gave them that spark that they need. So Microsoft knows that Sony has a big user base. They know, but Game Pass gave them the edge and spark that they need. So every time you turn around in video games, it's Game Pass. That name is everywhere. So Microsoft, you know, for them to stay relevant in the video game industry, Game Pass gave them the spark that they need. But Microsoft now, to keep Game Pass going now, they have to stay consistent, and that's how they can maintain their relevancy in the video game industry. So everything they do now is built around Game Pass. Like I gave you guys the analogy of the Unreal Tournament 2004, when I was talking to you about the cores. Like Game Pass is the core, and then, you know, like ZeniMax Bethesda is one of the nodes, uh, Activision Blizzard, all that. So Windows is like the clouds above Game Pass that gives Game Pass the energy it needs. But Game Pass now is the core of Microsoft business. But ZeniMax, Bethesda, Rare, the Coalition, Activision Blizzard, they're all the nodes around Game Pass. So yeah, Game Pass, like I told you guys before, it's a Game Pass world and we're just living in it. Once they came up with Game Pass and they got that title, there is no video game title right now that can beat that name right now. Game Pass. So Game Pass gave Microsoft the energy, the momentum it needed, and PlayStation knows this. Okay, they know. Okay, they know. If PlayStation would have had the title Game Pass, Xbox would be dead. But Microsoft came up with the title first and got it. And every time when you think of video games, it's Game Pass, Game Pass, Game Pass, Game Pass. We don't think about no PlayStation Plus. We don't think about no Nintendo Network. Whenever we think of video games, it's Game Pass. So yeah. Now you know why Activision Blizzard is so important to the Game Pass ecosystem, because if you played Unreal Tournament 2004, right? They got this title. They got this game mode called Onslaught. It's like red versus blue. So blue would have like a core and 4 nodes, right? And then red has the power core and then 4 nodes that feeds the core. So you got to destroy the nodes first, and then attack the core. Second. It's the same analogy with Game Pass now. Microsoft built a power structure now, a core called around their entire video game business. It's called Game Pass. Game Pass is the core of their business. So now, but Game Pass now, it needs support, and that's where Rare, the Coalition, 343, Iron Gate with Killer Instinct, ZeniMax, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard. Now you know why Activision Blizzard was so important now to Game Pass, because Game Pass is like Pac-Man, it eats up everything. So when Activision Blizzard popped up on the radar, Microsoft is like this. As soon as Facebook name got mentioned in it, oh really? Facebook try to buy you guys? We'll take care of it. Microsoft is like this before Sony could even notice. Done. Okay, so Activision Blizzard goes to Game Pass. Yeah. So if you played Unreal Tournament 2004, it's the same analogy. You got Game Pass, that's the core, but I got nodes all over the place. Yeah, to support it. Yeah. So once they got that title, man, Sony might have a big user base, but Microsoft can't be touched right now because of that title, Game Pass. Every time you think of video games, you don't be thinking PlayStation. That name is old. You don't think Nintendo. That name is old. It's Game Pass. So yeah, that name carries a lot of weight, man. So when Microsoft said they lost the console wars, they're talking about the user base that PlayStation got. But Game Pass now keeps Microsoft in the spotlight at all times. Okay? You will think Game Pass before you think Windows. As soon as Windows come out, okay, Game Pass. This little feature, okay, Game Pass. Game Pass is, I mean, Windows is like the cloud over Game Pass, man. But Game Pass is the core to Microsoft business, man. So yeah, Sony might have a big user base, but Sony knows is like Sony trying to have a cloud subscription service like Game Pass, but they don't have that title. That title, Game Pass, it is precious, man. Golden. you know what I'm saying? So whoever got that title, they cannot be touched, man. So yeah, every time you think video games, it's Game Pass. So anyway, I'm gonna leave this video for y'all to enjoy. I don't want to go too long here. Nice talking to you people again. Chris, still a Star Wars and Star Trek thing. More Dark Side. Go. Peace.